Donald Trump is back in the United States. The defense minister is out in Israel. We'll take a deep dive into what has been a huge week. It's unholy. I'm Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Yonit Levy of Channel 12 in Tel Aviv. Unholy, two Jews on the news. It has been quite a week. We have so much to talk about. But before that, I got you something. It's been an intense week for you, I know, and for me too. But,
yes.
You know, if we've learned anything from the United States of America, that great nation, besides democracy and all that, I think the one thing that we learned is the importance of merchandise. So you, my friend, are the first to receive. I know our, viewers on YouTube will see this. I will explain that it is an unholy tote bag.
That is very cool.
Designed by the only cool person on our team, which is our EP, Michal Poat, because we look very cool on this. It's coincidental with the way we look in reality. A little too orange for Ashkenazi Jews as well, but it is indeed our logo, and it says, "Thank God it's Friday."
TGIF, both of us, you and me with our sunglasses on. Orange, of course, being the new colour of the hour, because the orange
I'm glad
one...
you noticed that. It's not a mishap that it turned out so orange. It's actually meant to be a Donald Trump nod.
That is quality merch. And, in fact, I'm in the home of sort of political merch here in Washington, where suddenly the price of a Harris Walls button or badge has suddenly rocketed because it's gone from, current to collector's item. That is good merch, and eventually we will tell our listeners. There will be a way that our listeners will be able to get hold of their own.
Indeed. Wait till the end of the
top-quality
show.
linen
We'll tell you
tote
how.
bag.
And,
We'll tell you all about
our
that.
slogan is, we don't want to burden you with our opinions. Carry them in our tote bag. We will tell you all about that. Yes, you have spent the week. I'm very jealous about this, but you have spent the week in Washington and a lot of other places.
A lot of other places. Only got to Washington, actually, just a few hours before Election Day. The rest of the time was on the road, just frantically searching for wherever the campaign was, really. And so... more or less this time last week, actually, it was late Friday afternoon in a suburb in Philadelphia, at a phone bank where Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff was visiting the volunteers. I mention him because he's the only Jewish participant in the drama at the top level. And he was, the message was, make him the first gentleman. And of course, that dream thwarted. But from there to Salem, Virginia, for one of those Trump rallies, which is a phenomenon if people have never been. It is a kind of part religious ritual, part sort of personality cult extravaganza. It's pure showbiz, and it does go on and on and on. And I can confirm that it was true that people did leave before the end. That's part of the thing. People come just to see him, bathe in the light, the orange light, and then they go. And then into the car for a very long trek to Michigan, very long drive to Lansing, Michigan for one of Kamala Harris's closing rallies. And there, high energy in the room. But now, in retrospect, of course, you can see that some of the differences were visible. And just I'll mention two that I now think were relevant. I mean, one was that, Lansing, she did that rally on a university campus, Michigan State University, Lansing University town, lots of young people. That's where she was strong, college-educated people. The one group she actually, who did not move over to Trump was college-educated white women, pretty well every other group. I think, black women too, stayed with Kamala Harris, but every other group moved over to Donald Trump. And you could sort of see a clue there because of how narrow, in a way, the support base was. And at Trump, it was, it's different because it's Trump devotees. But here was the difference I thought was relevant, was that Donald Trump speaks 90 minutes, he goes off script, it's rambling, it's meandering, but you are seeing him and you are hearing what's in his head. And with Kamala Harris, it was the stump speech. It was the same speech you could have seen on TV the night before in Wisconsin, and you would see the following night or the day after in Philadelphia. It didn't really vary. And I think that thing about authenticity is such a thing now in elective politics. People want to feel they actually know who this person is. And Trump, say what you like about him, you know who he is. and there are thoughts that come into his head and come straight out of his mouth. And people love that. They love the feeling that he says what he thinks. And with her, it's a much more guarded, polished, disciplined performance of a scripted speech. Anyway, I offer those things as just small observations, which in retrospect you realise are highly relevant. And in fact, even at the time, they seemed relevant. But yes, huge win for Donald Trump, not ambiguous at all, in every demographic pretty well, and in all those swing states. So it's a decisive win, and it means we look for, you and I will now talk about what this is going to mean, because it's going to have huge, huge implications.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say, I think, to try and analyze, because we don't have all of the data yet, but to try and analyze the Jewish vote and the Muslim vote and what this, can we read anything from the Israel-Hamas war into this? But before we do all that, I mean, the one thing that I can share with you my thoughts on election night. And we had a very different election night, you and I. You were in the Harris headquarters in Washington. I was sitting in a studio in Jerusalem for 14 hours. And that whole beginning of that election night broadcast was dedicated to a complete different drama, political drama in Israel, which is, of course, the firing of Defense Minister Gallant. We'll get onto that in our show today, of course. But I mean, the only thing I was saddened by the thought that this will set back the prospect of a female president in the United States many years. I don't know how long it will be before the Democrats dare to do this again. And I don't know how long it might be for the Republicans to try and do that. I just think that is a tragedy. You and I are sitting in, come from countries that had a female leader a long time ago. It shouldn't be this difficult. And I'm not going into the campaigns and the reasons for her failure. I think there are many, and everyone's very smart in hindsight, but just that thought, right? And to think of, I don't think it's disconnected from a country that, still thinks that a 6-week abortion ban is somehow a logical thing in certain states.
On that point about the woman leadership, you're absolutely right to bring it out. One thing I was really struck by at the Harris rally was the women who were there, and it was disproportionately a female crowd, did not even dare say out loud their hope that this could mean a woman president, because they felt they'd been burnt in 2016, where that was central to the Hillary Clinton campaign, break through the ultimate glass ceiling. They didn't talk about that. They talked instead about why it was important for women's rights, particularly, as you've just mentioned, reproductive rights. They talked about that, but it was as if they didn't dare to dream about that. And you're completely right that a lot of Democrats are drawing the conclusion, we only ever win this thing if it is a man. And in a way, I mean, Obama is exceptional, but unless it's an exceptional talent, maybe it has to be a very conventional white man. Joe Biden won, and Bill Clinton won. These are people who can win, but otherwise you can't take that risk. And it did make me wonder if, in a way, the first party to do it, as it's been in Britain, will be the party of the right. Britain's Conservative Party has just elected its fourth woman leader, a black woman, Kemi Badenoch, as its leader. The Labour Party, supposedly the sort of progressive left party, has only ever had white men as its leader. And I wonder if there's something in that, which is Republicans and Conservative parties can dare to do it because they have already the sort of credibility of those conservative voters. And maybe that's where it's going to have to come from in America. It will have to be a Republican nominee who's female. But yes, that was another layer of sadness at Howard University, where they began the evening, dancing and celebrating. And as the returns came in, grew more and more forlorn. But I think the thing you've just said is definitely part of that sadness for them.
So let's talk about the Jewish vote and the Muslim vote, shall we?
Yeah, we should.
I mean, let's start with that. Look, I see the numbers coming out. We should say this is only the beginning, right? It's exit polls. We are 2 days, a day and a half after the elections. And I see the difference in the Jewish vote in New York, and I see a little bit of a difference in Pennsylvania. I would want to argue, though, and, I'm quoting things that Richie Torres, congressman from the Democratic Party, a very staunch Israel supporter, he wrote this on Twitter. He wrote, Orthodox Union have an exit poll showing a serious split in the Jewish vote in Pennsylvania, 48% for Harris, 41% for Trump. And then he continues, because there are already conclusions coming out of that. In his opinion, he says, if you're delusional enough to believe that the far left's hyperbolic and hysterical hatred for Israel led to no loss of Jewish support in the swing states, then I have 270 electoral votes to sell you. Now, the thing about this is that even if you think about how much Trump gained in Jewish vote in Pennsylvania 4 years ago, which was about 30%. So the difference here is 11%. You come to Unhealthy for the math, don't you? That is about 33,000 votes. That is not what swayed Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, as we speak, is about in a gap of about 130,000 votes for Trump. So even if there is this sort of drop in Jewish vote, again, in certain places, that is not what won Trump the presidency. I think that is important to say. In other places like New York, it's correlated very much to the general population's drop in voting for Democrats in New York.
Yeah, no, that's right. There's a pattern there that in blue states, there was quite a lot of shift to the Republicans and to Trump. And the first warning of that came in Virginia, which has become solidly blue. And yet actually in the end, Harris won it narrowly, whereas Joe Biden had won it by 10 points 4 years ago. But on the Jewish vote, so the early exit polls, you're completely right that everyone, the nerds, wait for the Pew study, which is the sort of definitive one that comes out several months later. It's currently saying 79% of the American Jewish population went for Kamala Harris, 21 for Donald Trump. That would go with the habitual, perennial way in which American Jews line up behind the Democrats. To the extent they are the most reliable group. They are almost the most reliable group. You know, I think black women may be the exception, but they're right at the top of on the reliability scale. Then you drill down and you see that, as you mentioned, those figures in Pennsylvania. In New York, it was 56% for Harris, 43% for Trump. What is that about? Partly it's your point about the general drop, but I think also it may be. I mean, I wonder in New York whether there was a Columbia effect that garnered worldwide attention, whether they did sour a lot of American Jews to the left, broadly defined, and they looked at Kamala Harris and thought she's part of that. Some of them, and therefore moved away. I mean, the other thing I just was going to say about this is obviously we're interested in how the issue played for American Jews and their preferences, and there are these signs of erosion in Pennsylvania and New York. It was also an issue in terms of the country, that Gaza was an issue, and a lot of people feared it was going to be game-changing and decisive. And we talked about it a lot in, for example, a state like Michigan, where there is the country's largest Arab American population concentrated on the city of Dearborn. And we talked about that. And on the podcast a lot before. Look, that did pan out. 43% of the city of Dearborn, which previously had gone 9-1 for Biden, 43% voted for Donald Trump. He topped the poll in Dearborn. Only 36% for Harris. And Jill Stein, the anti-war campaigner and sort of Putin mouthpiece, she got 18% there. So that did happen. And yet, this is what caught my eye, is if you think that's what swung Michigan, and again, the numbers don't say that just for the reasons you said before, you then see this exit poll out of Michigan, which says, 29% thought the Biden administration were too strong in their support for Israel. So you think, okay, that's the thing we're talking about. But 27% said they weren't strong enough in their support for Israel, and 38% thought the Biden administration got it just right. In other words, as the Americans would put it, it's a wash. It just nets out and cancels itself out. After all that noise, it shows you there would have been a price for the Biden administration if they had been tougher on Israel. That actually, in a strange way, maybe they got it just about right for the politics, because they displeased as many people as they pleased, and most people thought they were more people thought they were broadly in the right place. So in the end, a lot of these things, they had effects, but they weren't decisive in the way that some thought they might be.
Dear listeners, you come to Unholy for voting percentages, don't you?
I think they do. I see us as the John King and Steve Kornacki of the Jewish Israel podcasting world.
I would want to add one more thing to that, to what you're saying. Look, Donald Trump picked up votes in almost every group in the American electorate, right? We see the data now. So it only makes sense that he picked up votes also in the Jewish community, the Muslim community, the Latino community, and the Amish community. I mean, that is just the way the math of all of this works. Now that we do have a president, a 47th president, I think it is important to kind of focus on what that will look like when it comes to Israel. Because it's safe to say, I think, that Netanyahu will not get angry calls about settler violence. There won't be sanctioning of Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, the far-right parts of Netanyahu's government. There probably won't be pressure on Netanyahu from the Trump administration to bring back Yoav Gallant, like there was when he tried to fire him in March, or any pressure not to go for the judicial overhaul. But I do think that if, and this is a bit of a paradox, if Trump decides that the war in Gaza and the war in Lebanon should be over, and by the way, that is what he is saying in recent weeks, and particularly in his own acceptance speech, he said, I'm not one to start a war, I'm one to end a war. Then if he calls Netanyahu and says, you have to end this, Netanyahu can't play the game he would have played with Kamala Harris presidency, which is to say, I'm playing to my base. I want to show I'm the strong man, all of that, because his base is has a very strong support of Donald Trump as well. So I think that's a part of what can happen. Again, if Donald Trump decides that he wants to put this pressure on Netanyahu, it will be much harder for the prime minister to ignore that.
That's right, because now there isn't another party, another suitor for Netanyahu to flirt with. Before, if Biden gave him heat on anything, he could go off and dance on the other side of the street with the Republican crowd who would be nicer to him. Where does he go now? If Trump puts pressure on, he can't then get an invitation and go and speak to the Republicans on Capitol Hill because they'll agree with Trump. So there isn't that option that he always had when there was a Democrat incumbent. He did it with Obama. He did it with Biden, which was, I don't like what you're telling me. I'm going to play footsie with your opponents, and that will give you a political headache. That he's run out of road on that. He is, I spoke to some people here in Washington who use a strong word, which is to say he's frightened of Trump, Netanyahu, in a way that he was never frightened of Biden. And there's politics in that, which is for the reason I think we've just explained. But I think even on a personal level, there's a kind of, he is somebody who plays Netanyahu's game. And he's one of the few people he can sort of out-macho authoritarian swagger Netanyahu. That's your game, Netanyahu, but I can play even better. And there's no recourse, there's no hiding place. So I think if he wants this over, and one question in my mind is, does he want it over now, as in now, this day, because he just doesn't want it overshadowing, or does he want it over the day he takes office on January the 20th? And they're significant there, because does he think, I don't mind you doing this stuff on Biden's watch because it's bad news for Biden while he's still the outgoing president, just don't mess up my parade? Or does he think, just clear this up and out the way? And that's relevant in terms of the time window Netanyahu has. But the point about this war is it becomes Trump's problem. If there are those protests, he doesn't care what left-wing campuses say in the way Biden would have cared or Harris would have cared. But he doesn't want this. And the clue was that time several months ago when the war was relatively early by comparison, where Trump said this just needs to be off TV, which is the medium that is hardwired into his cerebral cortex. TV is what matters. And he doesn't want those pictures on television. And so that will be the instruction to the Israeli Prime Minister. And as I say, the question in my mind is whether he gives him 3 months grace, mess up Biden's exit, knock yourself out, or does he say, I want this done now?
I mean, that's a big question. I think another question is the Iran story, because Israelis in general think that Trump is more hawkish on Iran. There are a lot of question marks here. The people who surround Trump are very pro-Israeli. I would maybe say accurately pro-Israeli right? People like David Friedman, people like Jared Kushner, with that caveat of how involved he will be in this. But a lot of other questions here. J.D. Vance is the most detached from Israel person to ever sit as vice president in the White House. So all of that is something that should be taken into consideration. All in all, I think Kamala Harris was someone that Netanyahu knew what the playbook would be, and the unpredictability of Donald Trump is something that he might be a bit trepidatious about when it comes to the relationship between the U.S. and Israel.
I think that's completely right. That on paper, you could say, and he obviously was, Netanyahu delighted by Trump's arrival, but there are complications. We talked about the transactional nature of Donald Trump. If there's a deal to be done that he thinks favors America and particularly Trump's interest, he'll lean heavily on Netanyahu to do it, and Netanyahu won't have many options. And if that means a deal that keeps Iran quiet and out, if that such a thing were possible, I think he would sign it. I'm just remembering
the Saudis in this, right? I mean, if Donald Trump wants a normalization with Saudi Arabia, Jared Kushner is the envoy to that, and the only thing in his way is Netanyahu has to agree to a Palestinian state. Well,
he'll
that's
say,
gonna be an
"Do
issue
it.
as well.
You've got to do it." And he thought that last time. I mean, we understand that he thought that's the price. You've got to say it, and was furious with Netanyahu when Netanyahu went back to him at one point and said, "We like the bit where we're allowed to annex territory. That we say yes to, but I say no to the bit where we have to accept a Palestinian state." And Trump said, "No way. That's not how it works. This is the deal." They do see it as a real estate deal, and they think there's a deal to be done, and they will not brook the usual fun and games from the usual mischief from Netanyahu, I think. Just one other memory that's in my head is Joe Biden, very shortly after October 7th, his warning to the Iranians not to get involved, that one-word warning, don't. That had weight because everybody believed he would actually do it. He would deploy force if he had to. Does anybody believe that the man who, as you said, wants to end wars, not begin them, would actually make good on a threat like that, or issue a threat like that? I'm not sure he would do that. He's not in that business of protecting America's allies. That's why NATO is now, in effect, a dead letter, because we know if you're sitting in Lithuania or Latvia and you're attacked by Russia, Trump's not coming to help you. But that logic, does it extend to this alliance? Would he do it? I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who say, of course he would. He's got the Christian evangelicals and he's got those circle of advisors who are so pro-Israel. But it's at least a question, and that is a change. I'm not going as far as saying be careful what you wish for, because I think Netanyahu's got what he wished for. But Trump is unpredictability extends to this.
So let me describe the scene to you, Jonathan. It's Tuesday, November 5th, the election day U.S. It's 8 o'clock in Israel. That is the exact minute that the evening news broadcast that I anchor begins. And we're all gearing up to talk about the election day already, in progress in the United States. It's 1 o'clock p.m. on the East Coast, and then a bombshell from Netanyahu's office. Our political analyst, Amit Segal, has been on this show a few times, reports that Netanyahu decided and has fired, actually, the defense minister, Yoav Gallant. Now, this is a huge deal. First of all, we are in the middle of a war. Israel is gearing up for a retaliatory attack from Iran after Israel attacked Iran, after Iran attacked Israel. This is a whole long story. And the news that Israelis hear at 8 o'clock is that Netanyahu fired his defense minister. Now, we should zoom out from this for a minute. We should say that Netanyahu has wanted to fire Yoav Gallant since the last time he attempted to do that, which was March of 2023. We'll remind our listeners, Yoav Gallant, then as defense minister, comes out in public and says that the fact that Israelis are so divided over the judicial overhaul is actually a danger to Israel's security. Sadly, reality proved him right 7 months after, on October 7th, when we were attacked by Hamas. But after that public appearance, Netanyahu wanted to fire Yoav Gallant and actually decided to do it. And then spontaneous protests erupted all over Israel, and Netanyahu had to walk it back. That is what happened back in March 2023. This time, Netanyahu was adamant on firing Gallant for the main reason, we were talking about this a lot on the podcast, is the draft bill. The ultra-Orthodox part of Israeli society do not do mandatory service like the rest of the Israeli society. They wanted an official bill to exempt them because the bill that had done that so far ran out, and the Supreme Court said that the Knesset must pass a new bill. And the only impediment to actually doing that or bringing in a bill that everyone in the coalition agreed on was Yoav Gallant himself. And Netanyahu long wanted to I'm going to say this sounds cynical, but to remove this obstacle, because he needed his coalition intact. And this is, of course, the Achilles heel of the coalition, the fact that there is no conscription for the ultra-Orthodox, the fact that we are in the middle of a war, hundreds of soldiers are dying, and the military needs more soldiers. And Yoav Gallant kept saying this has to happen, and he actually also sent these drafts, 7,000 new draft call-ups for the ultra-Orthodox. Now, the politicians in the government, the ultra-Orthodox politicians said to Netanyahu, enough is enough. We need a bill, or at least any part of this that you could get through the Knesset, and we need it now. So that was basically the ultimatum. Netanyahu had to do it. I think the part of him chose to do it at 8 o'clock, maybe for that extra humiliation of Gallant himself, but also because maybe he also thought that the whole world, and particularly the Biden administration, is focused on something else entirely. So that would be a good opportunity for him to do it. But as I say, it's a bombshell in Israel, not only politically, but also the security establishment saw Gallant as someone who's their advocate, which is what he's supposed to be as a defense minister, someone who has experience and knows how this works, and someone who's been running the war for more than a year. So that is where we are at this point. Netanyahu firing Yoav Gallant, putting in his place Israel Katz, who was a foreign minister. The main thing you need to know about him is that he's very loyal to Netanyahu, and he will not be an impediment for a new draft bill.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to react is the cynicism of the timing, I think, which is clearly when he knew the world's attention was distracted, and as you say, Washington's attention was distracted. And I did notice that there were street protests, but they weren't on the same level as March 2023, and you do wonder if that's partly because of that timing, that that people are just elsewhere, but also a kind of exhaustion from everything that's happened in the 18 months since.
I mean, of course, an exhaustion. People don't forget that there are thousands of Israelis, reservists, fighting a war in the military. Yeah. There's Israelis are concerned that there might be an attack from Iran. So many people are saying we really want to go out into the streets. We're not going to leave our kids alone when we might be attacked. This is the war. It's a completely different scenario from the one we saw on March of 2023 when people flooded the streets.
So the other things to say about it are. One, I mean, just the point you've made about the draft bill issue, to go to these lengths in order to exclude and exempt a group of people from carrying the national burden at a time like this. There are plenty of people who are not, just of the left, who just think that is appalling. This is a kind of wider issue, and we talked, didn't we, the other day about how this goes even into the religious Zionist community. It's not just secular versus religious. It's a wider thing. The second thing I think is about getting rid of a defense minister in the middle of a war. And, one of the big arguments he's always made about why there couldn't be elections, for example, there couldn't be possibly a change of leadership in the middle of wartime. Well, how can you even think of such a thing? Well, he's sort of removed that argument now because he's got rid of the person who is overseeing and in charge of the operational business of fighting a war, and therefore is saying that is okay. Well, if it's okay in one area, then maybe it's okay in another. But I also just wonder about this, which is he's put in this cipher, Israel Katz. I mean, somebody who just gives sycophancy a bad name. And in effect, it means that Netanyahu is now his own defense minister, just as he was his own foreign minister when Israel Katz was in that job. So there's a hoarding of power point, but it does mean there are these other appointments that can go through now in terms of the new chief of staff, new heads of intelligence, and so on, where he will just get put in his own, I would assume, he will go as far as he can to get in people who are similarly pliant and do his bidding. And all of this is part of an operation, isn't it, to the thing that Netanyahu cares about most in a way, which is his political position, and therefore Operation Blame. This makes it easier for him to dump the blame for October the 7th, where he has always wanted it to be, which is on the heads of the military and intelligence chiefs who, in his version, failed to see and warn him that October the 7th was coming. Gallant was a roadblock in the way of that maneuver because he was standing there between Netanyahu and Herzi Halevi as chief of staff and the heads of the intelligence branch, and now he's got somebody who will play along with that move. So I think it is deeply cynical, and I do wonder about even just imminently you will now not have somebody as the defense minister who got, for example, those relationships with these American counterparts, who are, after all, in place for 3 more months. You're now going to have a novice in that job. If your care was really about fighting the war rather than politics, you wouldn't have made this move. But we've known for a long time that is not what Netanyahu cares about. He cares about his political position.
I mean, from Netanyahu's standpoint, what he said is we have disagreements and they can't be bridged. Now, by the way, they did have disagreements. And I think that is actually a good thing. The fact that the country is run not by yes men, but people who have a conversation and who do have an argument. So first of
Although
all,
they didn't even have a conversation. They weren't even talking to each other.
They weren't even talking,
but
but they knew that. I mean, Netanyahu knew his views. I mean, in the sense that he thought that there should be a
Absolutely.
strategy for the day after. He thought the hostages should return now. He thought that there should be, to your point, a commission of inquiry set up after the war. These are all things that were a thorn in Netanyahu's side. And of course, you mentioned the important thing, the fact that in Israel, the person who needs to nominate the next chief of staff is the minister of defense. So it was clear, and there were briefings from Netanyahu's advisors right after Gallant was fired, that perhaps next in line would be the IDF chief of staff, and as you said, the head of the security branch, the Shin Bet, Ronen Bar. Now, they quickly walked that back because there was public outroar, but it is clear that there is something of an experiment here publicly, that if Netanyahu succeeds publicly, and he is, by the way, succeeding, where, as you said, the protests aren't on the scale that they were on March of 2023, then maybe the next step is indeed to say, push aside the IDF chief of staff, push aside the Shin Bet, and let's see. And I want people who are only agree with me. We should say, by the way, that all of these people, all of them, are implicated by the terrible failure of October 7th. But if that is the case, so is Netanyahu himself. And the difference is that they all, including Yoav Gallant, said that they are responsible. And it was very clear that the minute the war in some ways ends or appears to be ending, they would all, on their own volition, say, we are done. We're stepping down because of this terrible failure. And again, we should reiterate, and I did say this, but again, the point of the Biden administration pressuring Netanyahu last time around to bring back Gallant and to, reverse some of the judicial overhaul, that is not going to happen now. The Biden administration is busy doing other things, and the next administration is not as concerned with these internal issues as the previous administration was.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right to link these two things together. The weekends with Netanyahu knowing that 2 big obstacles or thorns in his side have gone. It's a great week for him. He looks ahead and sees that the restraint he had sitting around at the cabinet table is out, and the restraint he had coming from Washington, D.C. is soon to be gone. And in effect, it's already gone because it's a lame duck outgoing administration. So if you thought Netanyahu was already exercising something or aspiring to exercise unchecked power, he's getting closer and closer to the reality of that. And I think, if you're, as many people are, afraid by what they are seeing, then this is then those fears deepen. I do want to say just something about international opinion and just how a contrast that will now open up between America and the rest of the world. And I'm thinking about northern Gaza and this statement from the IDF saying that Palestinians will not be allowed to return to their homes in northern Gaza, that from now on everyone there will be regarded as a combatant. There will be no civilians, even though, of course, some civilians have stayed behind, and the cutting off of aid into the north, there'll be aid into the south. The Americans the Trump administration will have no problem with that. But people around in Europe and elsewhere will say that's confirmed what the opponents of Israel said was ongoing. They will call that ethnic cleansing, however painful that is for Israel and its supporters to hear. They will hear that, but they won't hear it coming out of the incoming administration in Washington, D.C. That's a big development. Another thing I think that would have got more attention had it not come in the week of an American presidential election and this huge bombshell in Israeli politics.
There are 2 different investigations that have to do with Netanyahu's office, and they both broke in a certain way in the past week. And one of the sort of the ideas around the fact that he fired Gallant this week was also connected to the fact that some thought he wanted to divert attention from these two investigations going on. So let's just walk through what they are. One of them is a case revolving a man named Eli Feldstein. He was a spokesperson in the prime minister's office who, according to this allegation, essentially stole documents, top secret documents from the sort of inner sanctum of Israeli military intelligence, then leaked this to foreign news outlets, namely the Bild and the Jewish Chronicle, in a way that served the interests of the prime minister, that has to do with hostages and what Hamas knows and what Israel knows. The reason why, the immediate knee-jerk reaction from the prime minister's office to this story was, first of all, they tried to say that the man himself didn't work in the prime minister's office. But the second thing they said is, this is just a leak. Why don't you investigate it? All of the leaks. The problem here is not the leak. The problem is the illegal obtaining of documents and the fact that they were stolen, and the rest of it. And the judge himself said it was the way that it was leaked endangered a source and endangered, in fact, the attempt to bring back the hostages. And of course, many have commented on the fact that the way that this was leaked to the international media was manipulated in such a way that would, let's say, reinforce Netanyahu's own strategy and not anyone else's. So that is one story. We should go on to the other story, but if you want to, say something.
No, I was just going to say it's worth just unpacking a little bit, which is, in one case, as I understand it, there is the leaking of highly classified material, which were then falsely presented. And there was this handwritten note which appeared to be the words, or was presented and, claimed to be the words of Yahya Sinwar himself. It turns out it wasn't, and it was the words of if anyone, some mid-ranking Hamas operative, outlining his strategy, which just so happened to serve Netanyahu's purposes and put Netanyahu's opponents in a bad light, as if they were somehow doing the bidding of Sinwar, total manipulation of a document. And then in the other case, as I understand it, we're talking about actual fabrication, something that was just invented out of whole cloth, a fake story. So just worth breaking down those two elements.
And the other story surrounding the prime minister's office might be more severe in the top level people that it touches on. In the office is a probe led by the unit, the police division that's focusing on serious crime. It's allegations that official protocols were tampered with, official protocols from the beginning of the war. This ties into a story published in Yediot Achronot newspaper about 6 months ago. Journalist Nadav Eyal reported that Avi Gil, who is Netanyahu's military secretary, sent a letter to the attorney general essentially addressing these concerns, that these protocols were tampered with. And when you connect all this to the fact that Netanyahu is adamantly against a commission of inquiry, this raises a lot of questions about the digging into what happened in those first days of the war.
And just to clarify, you're using the word protocols there in the sense of minutes, the minutes of the meeting, writing down what happened, that the claim is that they were doctored, the actual account of what had been said, in order to put Netanyahu in a better light. And because that is obviously a hugely shocking claim, that he's retrospectively doctoring the record to say, I didn't know what I did know, and people didn't tell me what, in fact, they did tell him. So huge scandal if all these allegations are proven
points
true.
To Netanyahu. It points to other officials, some of them senior. It doesn't yet implicate him. Right, you need that smoking gun that says he told them to tamper with the protocols. That is not where this case is.
Oh yes, no, I wasn't suggesting that. I was suggesting just the idea that it exonerates the effect of the tampering with the rewriting of the minutes is to put him in a better light. So we have awards to hand out. I thought I would keep it Washington because I'm in Washington, and I thought our nominee for the Chutzpah Award would be the owner of this city's newspaper, the Washington Post, who issued this tweet: "Big congratulations to our 45th and now 47th president on an extraordinary political comeback and decisive victory. Wishing real Donald Trump," because this is on Twitter, "all success in leading and uniting the America we all love. full of warmth and effusive welcome for Donald Trump. This from the man who had ordered pulled at the last minute, his own newspaper's endorsement of Kamala Harris. And the great scholar of tyranny, Timothy Snyder, said, reminded people of his warning that one of the things to watch out for is preemptive or premature obedience. That when there is a tyrant, you will notice a whole lot of people who get their obedience and surrender, their submission, in early, preemptive surrender. And he sort of implied that Jeff Bezos had been doing that before the election, deliberately not wanting to anger Donald Trump as before he came in by endorsing his opponent. And there, just in case there was any confusion, Bezos issues a personal red carpet welcome to Donald Trump. People noted equally that Amazon does a lot of business with the US government and did not clearly want to be on Donald Trump's, enemies list, maybe putting it too strong. But he clearly wanted to stay on Donald Trump's Christmas card list. And so, having yanked the endorsement that was written by his supposedly independent newspaper, he then bends the knee and doffs his cap to the incoming president. Jeff Bezos, winner of our Chutzpah Award for this week, I think.
I want to just make sure that we get that it's Jonathan's choosing of Jeff Bezos. I still want my Amazon packages arriving on time, so I'm fine with whatever I wasn't listening. So can I do the Mensch Award?
Yeah.
Just because I think the choice of the... Oh, by the way, we should say that this idea came from our Instagram. Listeners kind of pitched in. We usually ask them what they think, who the Mensch and the Chutzpah Award of the Week should be. So this idea comes from them. It's Tom York, who is, first of all, a wonderful singer. He's the main vocalist and songwriter of Radiohead, of course. But the reason we're giving him the Mensch Award this week is that he was on stage in, I think it was Melbourne in Australia, and he was heckled by a pro-Palestinian protester in the middle of a show. And he actually tried to engage him, tried to talk to him, said, come on stage. And the minute he realized that this is not going to be a conversation, he kind of left. Tom York himself left the stage. Now, what I think is he deserves a Mensch Award even for a larger reason. He was called, I mean, there was pressure put on Radiohead to ban Israel, not to perform in Israel. He said, and I thought, I found that quite heartwarming. He said, look, we don't agree with Donald Trump, but we perform in the United States, and we don't agree with Netanyahu, but we perform in Israel. And I found that to be a very good answer. And here, the fact that he, didn't ignore the man. He tried to engage him, tried to understand what was going on. The minute he realized this is someone who just wanted to, yell and get the attention, he walked away. So I think that the whole reason behind this is a good enough, rationale to give him the Mensch Award.
Yeah, no, I like it for your point about engaging with the heckler. Radiohead heads, nerds of the band will know that Radiohead has a whole backstory with Israel. Which is that the reason why, partly, the band have refused pressure to boycott is because they say they feel they owe a lot of their success, and maybe their success at all, to Israel. As I understand it, they've been playing, they were sort of struggling a bit, weren't finding any traction when I think a DJ in Israel would just loved their music and played one of their songs again and again and again on the radio, and it became a hit. Here, and I think the first place they had a hit record was in Israel, and that's what made them believe that, okay, they're doing something right. So if you're a big Radiohead fan, I think you have Israel to thank partly for making sure they didn't fall off the map and give up. So I think that's partly in the back of the band's mind that there's one reason why they don't want to break ties with the country they feel sort of saved them from potential oblivion. So Tom York, I think
Tel Aviv. There are people who still tell the story of that being in that small, legendary performance of Radiohead when they were still just starting out. So you are right about that having the connection to Israel.
So we are delighted to send that on its way, perhaps via Amazon as a package to Tom York, his Mensch of the Week award. We are all over the socials, as Yonit's mentioned. We're on YouTube. You can see this rather now bereft hotel room of mine in Washington, but and a much better setup for your needs. So we're on YouTube if you want to watch the podcast as well as hear it. And we are at Unholy Podcast on Instagram and on Facebook and elsewhere.
Right, and that tote bag that I created for you, I didn't hear any gratitude, by the way, but we'll just say to our listeners that this is our limited edition tote bag, first ever Unholy merch, and so make sure you're subscribed to our Substack to get one once we start selling them in our Unholy store. I have big plans for us, sir. I don't know if you've noticed. We shall say our thank yous to Michal Porat, and we'll meet next week.
See you then, Yonit.